The heavy doors of Almacks swung open as the evening crowd surged through, a torrent of silk gowns, powdered curls, and polished boots pressing into the cavernous salon. Warm light spilled from the glittering chandeliers above, casting long, wavering shadows upon the polished parquet floor. The orchestra's soft strains drifted through the air, notes of violins and flutes lingering faintly, like a whisper of promises yet to be spoken. It was the heart of London's season, the nerve centre of society's restless pulse, where fortunes were made, whispers disseminated, and reputations forged or shattered with a glance or a phrase. Into this carefully measured tumult stepped Eleanora. She paused just beyond the threshold, beneath the grand archway, her posture impeccable despite the flutter within her chest. Her emerald eyes scanned the room with quiet observance, noting the familiar faces clustered beneath crystal chandeliers, the mingled scents of lavender, rosewater, and the sharp hint of cigar smoke wove around her like an invisible shroud. Around her, the fashionable ladies clutched their fans like shields, and the gentlemen surveyed her with covert interest. Yet Eleanora's expression betrayed nothing but calm, a cool reserve emanating from within her slender frame that seemed almost to repel the restless curiosity charged in the air beside her. Her aunt's gaze was stern, unyielding. Lady Wimborne's presence was a bulwark of propriety and expectation, her tightly drawn lips and arched brows reminding Eleanora that this night was as much an examination of character as it was a step towards social reintegration. The widow's veil that cloaked Eleanora's brow, a deep, sombre black net embroidered with the smallest glints of jet beads, marked her apart instantly. It was an emblem not merely of loss, but of defiance, a statement loudly whispered without a sound. She was a woman who had loved, suffered, and would marry no other. Whispers began to ripple faintly through the assembled crowd, like an undercurrent beneath the gentle music. "Did you see the widow, still in her miserable veil?" "Such a pity, wasn't it?" a lady murmured over her fan, speaking low enough not to carry beyond her companion's ear. Another gentleman, his dark eye sharp beneath thick brows, glanced at Eleanora, with doubt flickering behind his polite smile. "It's uncommon, I hear. She refuses to consider remarriage." A rarity in these times, yet, through all of the murmurs and stares and veiled gossip, one man watched silently, his presence a weight felt before seen. The Duke of Malvern stood at the opposite end of the room, a pillar of dark elegance, his chiselled features shadowed by the flickering candlelight. His grey eyes, stormy and unreadable, tracked Eleanora's every move with an intensity that unsettled the faintest hint of composure she claimed as her own. A gentleman born of privilege and pride, he was no stranger to the games of the season, yet there was something in the widow's measured posture, her quiet strength beneath the black veil, that defied his usual easy dismissal. He noticed the delicate scar near her left temple, half hidden beneath the rich chestnut curls that framed her face like an artist's stroke, giving her a quiet vulnerability marred by the faintest shadow of tragedy. The corner of his mouth twitched, just barely, as if daring himself to believe the stories whispered about her, sharp-witted, resolute, unyielding. Whatever her reasons, he would watch. He would wait. Asterisked. Morning light sifted through the tall windows of Lady Wimborne's drawing-room the next day, soft and pale like sifted flour dusting the delicate furniture. The room hummed with a nervous energy entirely unlike the glamour of the night before. It was the hour of the morning calls, when débutantes and their chaperones assembled to exchange pleasantries, assessments wrapped in honeyed words, and polite smiles. Eleanora sat upright in a gilded armchair, her widow's veil removed now, revealing the full sweep of her chestnut curls loosely falling over her shoulders. Her deep green eyes sparkled with a mixture of defiance and fatigue, shadows under them betraying the weight she carried beneath the veneer of composed grace. Across the room, Lady Wimborne regarded her with a blend of pride and stern caution. "Eleanora, my dear, you mustn't let the ladies think your resolve is so absolute. The world is not as unyielding as you imagine. One must sometimes soften to survive." Eleanora's lips curved into a thin smile, sharp and a little wry. "Aunt, I appreciate your counsel, of course, but I am not so certain. Softening is always the wiser path." Her voice was steady, yet laced with a subtle steel that held firm even amidst the soft murmurs of assembled ladies. "I have made my choice, and I intend to keep it." A cluster of débutantes nearby exchanged glances, their silken gowns rustling like the flutter of expectant butterflies. One young woman, her voice sweet and edged with faint curiosity, ventured, "But Mrs. Everton, are you truly resolved never to marry again? Surely you must have felt some temptation. There are many eligible gentlemen eager to make your acquaintance." Her words fluttered like a delicate bird, probing gently yet insistently. Eleanora met her gaze, amusement flickering in the depths of her eyes. "Temptation is a curious thing, Miss Harrington. It may come wrapped in handsome features, wit, or wealth, but it is not always worth the price." Her tone was light but resolute. "I seek no second-hand fate, no patchwork happiness. If love has taught me anything, it is that some wounds are not meant to be freshly opened." The room buzzed quietly, with murmurs of admiration and faint scandal alike. The delicate balance of respect and gossip danced beneath the surface, a testament to Eleanora's reputation as a woman who dared to defy convention. Before the conversation could deepen, the sound of approaching footsteps drew everyone's attention to the doorway. The tall frame of the Duke of Malvern filled the entrance, his steely grey eyes sweeping the room with effortless command. The air seemed to still momentarily as he advanced, the faint scent of cedarwood and musk preceding him. His presence was magnetic, a living paradox of restrained power and quiet challenge. "Good morning, ladies." The Duke's voice was low, measured, yet held an unmistakable edge of intrigue. His gaze settled on Eleanora with unspoken curiosity, lingering just long enough to invite recognition, but not friendship. "I hope I do not intrude." A ripple passed through the group, a subtle tightening of breaths and exchange of glances. Lady Wimborne's posture stiffened imperceptibly, yet she maintained her usual air of control. "Your Grace is always welcome," she replied, her voice both courteous and cautious, "though you may have chosen an unusual hour to grace us with your presence." The Duke's mouth twitched into a fleeting smirk. He said, a veiled reference both enigmatic and pointed, "I find, Mrs. Everton, that such moments reveal much more than the afternoon teas or the evening dances ever could." Eleanora met his gaze steadily, her inner defences bristling with a mix of wariness and something deeper, an unexpected spark that she had carefully buried beneath layers of grief and resolve. "Indeed, Your Grace. And what revelations have you gleaned from this so-called quiet hour?" He stepped closer, the soft rustle of his coat, the only sound between them for a heartbeat. "That some veils conceal stories worth listening to. If one possesses the patience to hear." A sharp intake of breath from one of the younger débutantes underscored the unspoken tension crackling between them, an electric current beneath the polite veneer of social exchange. Eleanora inclined her head slightly, a gesture of cautious acknowledgment rather than surrender. "Perhaps, Your Grace, but I am afraid my story is not for public exhibition, nor would I presume it to be," the Duke said softly, yet with undeniable conviction. "Still, It is difficult not to be intrigued by a lady who wears her widow's veil with such unwavering pride, and yet carries herself with an undeniable strength. For a moment, their eyes locked, two prisoners of their own design, bound by circumstances neither wished to articulate in full. Then, as if driven by an invisible cue, their expressions softened just enough to acknowledge a mutual understanding born of unspoken pain and reluctant admiration. Lady Wimborne cleared her throat briskly. "We must not keep the guests waiting for their morning refreshment," she said, signalling with tight efficiency the end of the delicate exchange. "Mrs. Menne, B. Everton, perhaps it is time to introduce you to some more of the season's prospects." Eleanora allowed a small smile to touch her lips, a smile that held both defiance and invitation. "Very well, aunt. Let us see what the day may bring." The Duke's gaze lingered on her a moment longer, his brow furrowed ever so slightly, as though contemplating a decision. Then, with a final nod that promised nothing and suggested everything, he stepped back into the soft light of the hallway. As the door closed behind him, the room seemed to exhale, a quiet ripple passing through the gathered ladies and gentlemen who had borne silent witness to a meeting charged with more than polite civility. Eleanora straightened her spine, the weight of eyes upon her now transformed into a mantle of fierce resolve. She was a widow, yes, but a woman who had vowed to live on her own terms. And, as the season stretched ahead like an uncharted dance, the Duke's silent, watchful gaze was a reminder that some dances were not so easily declined. The country house, with its wide stone terraces and sprawling gardens, wore the soft golden veil of late afternoon, as Eleanora found herself navigating the sweeping halls of Cressingham Manor. It was the kind of place that exuded restrained luxury, the polished wood floors, the delicate scent of old books mingling with fresh flowers, and the distant murmur of polite conversations carried through high-ceilinged rooms. Tonight was a smaller, more intimate gathering, before the fervour of the season returned to London, yet it carried its own weight of expectation and subtle intrigue. Eleanora had hoped to evade him, Dunstan, the Duke, at least for tonight. But fate, or perhaps Lady Wimborne's unrelenting grip on social choreographies, had put them on a slow collision course down the wide hallway lined with portraits of ancestors who might have raised an eyebrow at the rising tension between the two. When she caught sight of him standing near the hearth, arms crossed and leaning slightly forward with an expression that was half amusement, half challenge, her breath stilled. It was not just the sight of the man, handsome and quietly imposing, despite the informal setting of a country house party, but the way his gaze had already found her across the room, like a magnet dragging iron. Instead, he waited, as though certain she would take the first step toward this unspoken duel. Eleanora's pulse quickened, and she tried to steady her nerves with the practiced ease one acquired having been a widow. She could still remember the day grief had settled deep in her bones, how it made her promise to herself that love would be no temptation, no folly. Yet here, now, surrounded by the gentle murmur of the countryside and the polite laughter of guests, Dunstan's presence was a disruption she neither wanted nor could quite resist. "Well, Mrs. Brents." Everton, his voice was low, the tone playful but edged with an intensity that suggested he held back more. "It seems Lady Wimborne forgets that you are quite adept at making an entrance, even without dancing through the ballroom." Eleanora's lips curved into a slight guarded smile. "Is it an entrance you find objectionable, Your Grace? Or mere intrigue that your attention falls upon one so notoriously resistant to society's charms?" "I find it refreshing," Dunstan admitted, stepping closer, the firelight flickering in his steely eyes. "Some tastes, leave a bitter aftertaste one cannot easily wash away. She met his gaze steadily, the memory of her vow hardening her resolve. And yet one must taste to know, do we not? I choose my indulgences carefully. He studied her for a moment, as if weighing her words against his own hidden truths, then inclined his head with a slow, deliberate gesture. Very well, Mrs. Everton. Then consider this a cautious step toward indulgence. You are as sharp as you appear. The Duchess of Wimborne would be wise to keep an eye on you this season. Her chest tightened with a mixture of unease and fascination. I assure you, the Duchess's vigilance is as unwelcome as your unsolicited commentary. Their eyes locked, a sparring of wills more potent than any swordplay. It was a silent conversation of eloquence and restraint, every word carefully chosen to reveal or conceal, to invite or repel. Dunstan's eyebrows furrowed slightly, a flicker of impatience breaking through his usual composed exterior. "Why is it," he asked quietly, "that you create barriers around yourself, as if your very soul might be stolen by a glance?" Eleanor's gaze drifted momentarily to the window, where the garden's shadows lengthened with the setting sun. "Do you afford to lose what remains? My heart, once broken, is a fortress now. I guard it not out of fear, but necessity." There was a catch in his breath, a flicker of something unspoken that passed between them, a recognition of wounds beneath polished facades. He took a step back, regaining his control. "Then I shall be the impudent trespasser who tries to breach that fortress, whether you invite him or not." A blush, quick and fierce, bloomed on her cheek. Eleanor's sharp wit returned with a spark. "I would advise caution. Castles, even the strongest, have defences against fools. And yet," he countered, "even fools can find their way inside." They stood there for a heartbeat, suspended between defiance and reluctant connection, the murmur of the house party fading as the world seemed to narrow to only the two of them. Before the moment could deepen, break, Lady Wimborne's sharp voice echoed from the direction of the drawing-room, summoning Eleanor with the imperious air of one who had mastered social command. The spell was broken. She offered a final enigmatic smile, both a challenge and retreat. "I shall consider that a promise, Your Grace." Dunstan's lips twitched, the faintest trace of a smile. "It is more than a promise. It is a reckoning." As Eleanor moved away, her thoughts churned with unwelcome fascination and guarded hope. She despised how easily his presence unsettled her carefully constructed defences, yet she could not deny the subtle thrill of the battle-a-dance of intellect and emotion that had only just begun. Later that evening, the grand dining-room of Cressingham Manor filled with the murmur of well-dressed guests, exchanging polite chatter over fine cloth and crystal. The formal dinner glimmered under the weight of chandeliers, the glitter of silver, and the fragrance of rare spices creating an atmosphere both sumptuous and taut with unspoken tensions. Eleanor sat at the far end of the long mahogany table, the flickering candlelight casting intricate shadows across her delicate features. She kept her posture impeccable, her gaze calmly observant as servants brought forth the next course. The murmurs around her wove a complex tapestry of gossip, some fragments drifting to her ears like whispers barely meant to be caught. It was then that a subtle shift rippled through the room, a hush, a glance exchanged, a barely perceptible tightening of lips. The subject had turned, as if by invisible design, toward Dunstan. Eleanor felt it before she heard the sudden, almost imperceptible change in the room's atmosphere, where loyalty and curiosity clashed, the electric charge that accompanies scandal. A low murmur began, an elegant woman with sharp eyes leaning slightly forward to convey an insinuation to a neighbouring lord, a gentleman's smirk barely restrained behind a polished demeanour. The words were not spoken loudly, no overt accusation, yet the implications were as clear and dangerous as a duel at dawn. She caught the briefest fragments: the Duke's indiscretion years ago, careless whispers in bar. The shadows deepened beneath Dunstan's furrowed brow. He sat rigid in his chair, fingers tightening around the stem of his glass, as if it were a lifeline to quell the storm, threatening beneath his composed exterior. The faint bruise just above his temple, a remnant of some private conflict, seemed to darken in the candlelight, a silent testament to battles fought beyond polite company. Eleanora's heart twisted, not with pity, but with a cool understanding. The very gaze he had so often wielded with unyielding pride was now brimmed with a quiet hurt that no social mask could fully conceal. Yet, outwardly, Dunstan showed no sign of faltering. His lips pressed into a thin line, and when he finally met the eyes of those who dared to whisper, his steely glare was a clear warning, an unspoken command that some histories were not for public consumption. Eleanora sat still, her usual guarded heat replaced by a measured distance. She was no friend to scandal, nor did she wallow in the misfortunes of others. Yet in that moment, as the whispers threatened to swell into a tide, she recognized the sharp edge of isolation, a loneliness no title or fortune could remedy. She wondered what ghosts haunted the Duke's past, what secrets lay behind those stern eyes and furrowed brow, and whether she was, perhaps unwittingly, part of a reckoning neither of them had spoken aloud. As the dinner continued, with polite conversations resuming and laughter cautiously rekindling, Eleanora maintained her composure. She kept her distance, not from disdain, but from a desire to shield herself from the cruel spectacle, to remind herself that some walls were not hers to breach. Yet even as she wrapped her heart in the familiar cloak of resolve, a small voice inside her whispered that the Duke's silent suffering was a mirror to her own another dance of concealment and courage waiting to be explored beneath the glittering surface of the season. And as the shadows lengthened in the candlelit room, the duel of pride, pain, and intrigue continued, each glance, each whispered word a step deeper into a shared, dangerous game. The delicate slip of paper trembled slightly in Eleanora's slender fingers, its pale cream edge pressed against her palm like a silent challenge. The calling card bore only 2 words in Dunstan's precise script: Miss Ravenswood, a summons both simple and heavy with implication. It had arrived earlier that afternoon, delivered by a well-trained footman whose keen eyes lingered a little too long on hers, a subtle reminder that no message from the Duke ever lacked intent. She had folded the card away, then tucking it inside the pages of a book, determined to leave it untouched for the remainder of the day. The shadows of the drawing-room draped themselves around her like a shield, quieting the tumultuous thoughts that the card's arrival had already set in motion. That delicate curl of handwriting, so deliberate, throbbed in her mind like some secret heartbeat she was reluctant to admit existed. Yet the card was not merely a summons, it was an incitement. It pulled at threads she had so carefully woven into her resolve. Desire and duty, heart and propriety, they tangled as fiercely as the autumn winds rattling the windows outside. Later, when her aunt entered the room like a gust of icy wind, eyes alight with the sharp gleam of concern and expectation, Eleanora knew the reprieve would end. Lady Ravenswood's gaze locked on the card as it lay, innocuous and damning, on the silver tray beside Eleanora's teacup. "Child," her aunt began, voice low, "he has sent you a calling card. You cannot, should not, ignore it. It is not merely a matter of manners, but of necessity. The season advances, and your position in it depends on your choices now, and Dunstan awaits your response." Eleanor's pulse quickened, but her voice was a quiet ripple against the tide of her aunt's certainty. "I am aware, aunt, aware, yet silent. That well may be as reckless as it is foolish. The Duke watches, and the world watches with him. A refusal or delay will speak more loudly than any whispered scandal. Your reputation, delicate as fine lace, could unravel from a single misconception." She fixed her aunt with a steady look, heart clenching. "I have never sought a title or a husband for convenience, nor will I now. That is not the reason I linger here. Nor do I invite unnecessary attention." Lady Ravenswood's reply was a measured sigh, tempered with the impatience born of decades navigating society's ruthless currents. "Attention will come, whether invited or not. It is better to steer its course than be found adrift." Eleanor's hands tightened around the porcelain of her teacup, the fragrant steam trailing upward like half-formed thoughts. Her green eyes nodded toward the fireplace, where the pale embers flickered weakly, a reflection of her internal hesitation. "I will consider it," she said softly, "but not yet. Not until I have reconciled the parts of myself that this season threatens to fracture." Lady Ravenswood's eyes softened for a moment, perhaps with understanding or resignation, but her voice returned to its imperious timbre. "Consider well. Tonight, at Lady Eversley's ball, you shall decide your course." With that, she swept from the room, leaving Eleanor alone with the weight of decisions some born of duty, some springing from desires she dared not name. The remaining hours until nightfall passed in a blur of anticipation and resolve, the card like a small, unyielding beacon. Her gown, a shimmering confection of ivory silk embroidered with silver threads, hung heavy yet elegant on her slender frame. The scent of gardenias, tucked among her curls, filled her senses, a faint reprieve from the restless whispers inside her mind. Outside, the lamps of Bath flickered to life, soft, golden halos against the darkening sky, as the grand carriages began their slow procession toward Lady Eversley's opulent estate. The sound of hoofs on cobblestones created a steady, rhythmic drum, the familiar herald of the season's intricate dance of alliances and chance encounters, promises veiled in polite conversation. Inside the ballroom, the atmosphere vibrated with anticipation. The scent of polished mahogany, jasmine from crystal vases, and the faint undercurrent of candle smoke mingled with the clinking of glasses and muted laughter. Glittering chandeliers cast myriad reflections over the assembled company, a galaxy of silks, brocades, and diamonds sparkling beneath them. Eleanor entered quietly, the rustle of her gown announcing her presence, yet her posture bore the steely grace of a woman accustomed to hiding fire beneath calm water. Her eyes scanned the room, wary for any sign of the Duke, whose reputation preceded him like a shadow. Then she saw him. Dunstan stood near the grand staircase, a solitary figure amidst swirling couples and whispered speculations. His dark coat was cut to accentuate the broad strength of his shoulders and the length of his limbs, his steely grey eyes fixed on a point beyond the merriment, as if he were listening to a conversation only he could hear. His expression was unreadable, a mask both familiar and unknowable, as if sensing her gaze. His glance flicked to her, sharp and unmistakably discerning. The ghosts of their unspoken exchange lingered between them, silent and charged. Without a word, steady and composed, he stepped forward, navigating the throng with the confident ease of one accustomed to command. A murmur rose among the ladies who observed him, half in admiration, half in scandalized surprise. It was known that the Duke was a man ruled by pride, choosing his companions with rare care, especially in public. His approach cut through the currents of gossip, and when he reached her, his voice was a smooth command edged with quiet invitation. "Miss Ravenswood, may I have the honour of this dance?" Eleanor's breath momentarily hitched, the frail barrier of her carefully maintained restraint wavering. Yet she met his gaze squarely, her own voice calm, yet revealing the faintest tremor beneath its surface. "The honour would be mine, your grace," whispers swelled like a gathering storm. Gentlewomen nearby exchanged glances, the wordless verdict passing swiftly. The Duke's interest was no polite formality, it was a bold declaration, one that both unsettled and fascinated the room. Dunstan extended his hand, strong and certain. Eleanor placed her gloved fingers lightly within his grasp, feeling the quiet heat of that contact, a spark that flared and stilled in equal measure. The music swelled, then a gentle waltz, lilting and slow, like the measured steps they were to take beneath the watchful eyes of society. As they moved in graceful harmony, their bodies barely brushing, yet entirely attuned, the room seemed to fade to a distant murmur. The dance became a language of stolen glances and silent admissions. Dunstan's eyes searched hers with an intensity that spoke of battles fought in shadows, pain, regret, and something far more vulnerable, yet fiercely guarded. Eleanor's pulse fluttered, a delicate rhythm unaccustomed to such raw proximity. She found herself intrigued not only by the man before her, but by the fragment of truth, glimpsed in those brief moments, the sharp edges of a soul wrestling with its own truths. "Why, Miss Ravenswood, did you delay your response?" His tone was low enough to be private, yet resonant within the ballroom's grandeur. She hesitated, words caught between pride and something softer, more dangerous. "I weighed caution against impulse. Sometimes the heart is the last to reveal its inclinations." A faint, rare smile flickered on Dunstan's lips, the barest quiver of warmth beneath that brooding exterior. "Then consider this dance the first step toward revealing it." The melody carried them in measured turns, each movement a whisper of promise and restraint. Their bodies attuned like night and shadow. Outside the circle of light cast by the chandelier, eyes lingered, breath held, a tableau of tension and possibility suspended between tradition and longing. Eleanor, ever the keen observer, noted the subtle shift in the room's energy, the careful blend of envy, curiosity, and silent approval. She recognized, too, the tempest of expectations weighing not just upon her. His pride was both armor and cage, and tonight, for a fleeting moment, it had softened. Their dance ended with a graceful bow, the exchange of measured smiles and glances heavy with unspoken dialogue. As they parted, the distance between them felt simultaneously vast and electric, as if the path ahead was a winding road, uncertain but undeniably beckoning. Standing amid the swirl of swirling silks and murmuring guests, Eleanor felt a tremor of something she had not welcomed before, hope, fragile and fiercely alive. The season had begun in earnest, and so had the quiet unravelling of two guarded hearts. The drawing-room felt stifling under the weight of Aunt Harriet's sharp gaze, its corners darkened by lamplight and unspoken reproach. Eleanor stood by the wide window, the chill of the night pressing against the glass, a contrast to the fever burning quietly inside her chest. Aunt Harriet's footsteps came brisk and measured across the polished floor, each tap a prelude to the storm she carried. "Eleanor," her aunt's voice was low, but cutting like a scythe through the earlier calm. "This dalliance of yours with the Duke of Dunstan has become the scandal whispered behind every satin fan at Almacks. Did you imagine that such reckless proximity would pass unnoticed?" Eleanor's fingers clenched in the folds of her gown. The delicate embroidery of silver threads was a poor shield against the judgment pressing upon her. "Scandal," she said, voice steady but edged with a recoil she had no desire to show. "I have done nothing to invite scandal, aunt. Lord Dunstan is a man of high standing. Surely a dance or two cannot be cause for such uproar." Aunt Harriet's sharp eyes narrowed as though trying to freeze Eleanor's defiance in place. "High standing, yes, but his past is a shadow long and bruising. Whispers of anger, of reckless nights, of a young lord's follies. No, child, you do not understand the social undercurrents at play." She stepped closer, gesturing as if weaving invisible chains between them. "There are whispers of debts unpaid, sacrifices made in the dark. I have heard, from Lady Grafton herself, that Dunstan's temper has costumes and clothes masquerading as other scandals. His name drifts into every corner, and not always for reasons you would wish your own reputation to touch." She had known that the Duke was a man bound to as many secrets as honour, yet she had not anticipated the intensity of the walls that society had erected against him, a fortress that now threatened to imprison her alongside him. Meeting her aunt's gaze with the quiet steel that had carried her through darker days, "If I were to withdraw, the talk would not cease." And what better fuel does gossip have than a woman who yields to fear rather than strength? Aunt Harriet's hands clenched her own skirts. "It is not fear I counsel, but prudence. You have, for too long, carried the burden of a lost husband's memory like armour. Do not mistake my counsel for an attempt to confine you again. But this season, this fleeting parade of dances and letters, it may burn brighter for you than you realize, and not all fires bring warmth. Some consume." The old worn world of duty and survival tangled around Eleanor's heart like thick ivy. The scandal of association might stain her like a mark indelible in ink, harder to wipe away than Lysander's absence. Yet was it nobler to retreat, to hide beneath the veil of widowhood and propriety, or to claim the fragile thread of hope that Dunstan seemed to offer? "I cannot do that," she whispered, voice a blend of yearning and quiet rebellion. Not yet. If I run now, I run from myself as much as from the court of scandal." Aunt Harriet's expression softened, though not without sorrow. "Then steel yourself, niece. The waters you wade are deeper and darker than you imagine. And remember, there are those who will see your standing shattered before you even have the chance to settle it anew." Eleanor swallowed the lingering bitterness, the taste turning drier than the withered rose in her hand. "Let them watch," she answered, for now victorious in her small defiance, though every syllable felt like a step toward an uncertain abyss. "But I will not cower. The season has begun, and so must I." Outside, the night pressed against the glass like a soft, relentless tide, and somewhere, beyond the heavy curtains, the city murmured its eternal cycle of judgment and desire. The garden beyond the estate waited, a sanctuary untouched by the rigours of drawing-rooms and whispered reprisal. It was there, beneath the pale silver glow of a peppering of stars, that Eleanor found Dunstan leaning against the ancient yew-tree, shadows tracing the lines of his athletic form. His steely grey eyes caught hers immediately, but tonight the ferocity that often guarded them was tempered by an invitation to something rarer, vulnerability. She stepped toward him, the fresh scent of honeysuckle mingling with the cool air, a balm to the rawness left behind by Aunt Harriet's words. "You look as if you wrestle with your own ghosts," she said quietly, the night air cool against her flushed skin. Dunstan's lips curved in a faint, pained smile. "You might say that. Few would guess that a man known for his pride and temper carries the weight of mistakes no dance card can erase." He gestured to the gravel path beneath them, then began walking slowly, offering her the silent invitation to follow. She did, matching his stride, her heart beating an uneven rhythm, a curious blend of hesitance and burgeoning trust. The garden was a tapestry woven from shadows and moonlight, the air thick with the promise of secrets confessed beneath the breath of the night. "I have not always been the man the ton presumes," Dunstan said at last, voice low as the wind teasing the leaves. A sun denied the guidance that might have tempered him. Instead, left to forge a path through fire and folly, Eleanora listened, the cloak of suspicion she wore, each day beginning to peel back in the quiet sanctuary of his confession. "Do you know what it means to be judged not for the man you are, but for the man they believe you to be?" His expression darkened, a flicker of raw pain surfacing behind that furrowed brow. The world sees the Duke, the proud, the formidable. But inside there is a man battered by loss, by regrets he cannot undo. I have faltered, forged, alliances broken by my own hand, friends estranged by the tempest of my pride. My brother, he died distant from me, and I never had the courage to mend what was shattered between us. Eleanora's breath caught, empathy blooming where suspicion once stood. A man shaped as much by grief as by hauteur, his armour less impenetrable than the world fancied. She bent, slightly touching the rough bark of the tree beside them, a tactile reminder of endurance and quiet strength. It takes a rare sort of courage to share such burdens. The small scar near her temple itched faintly, a stark reminder of wounds, both seen and hidden. Widowhood carved me sharper, and still I carry the fragments of a life that was, and the silence of a heart that refuses to close. Dunstan turned toward her then, the grey of his eyes softened by moonlight and something tender hope. Longing, perhaps that is why we dance so precariously on the edge of propriety. Two souls scarred in ways others fail to see, each seeking refuge in the other's silent strength. They lingered in the hush of the garden, the world beyond fading into a murmur of distant lamps and muffled voices. Eleanora felt the invisible walls around her thawing, her breath steadying as if leakage was no longer a threat, but a release. "Do you believe," she asked, in an almost hesitant whisper, "that a trust, once broken, can be built again? And not just in the eyes of society, but in the heart?" Dunstan's gaze held hers, steady, fierce, and achingly sincere. "I believe that redemption is a road both arduous and necessary. That the scars we carry are maps, not markers of despair, but of survival and the strength to hope again." The sign of hope, so fragile and yet so defiant, wove its way between them beneath the night's embrace. For the first time, Eleanora allowed the tight controlled chambers of her heart to loosen, if only a little. The Duke was no longer merely a figure of whispered scandal or compelling pride. He was, like her, a man carved from pain and loss, seeking a path through the darkness. Their steps slowed, words fading into a gentle silence wrapped in the scent of night-blooming jasmine. Dunstan reached out almost hesitantly, a single hand brushing a loose tendril of chestnut hair from Eleanora's cheek. His touch reverent and careful, she did not draw away. In that simple quiet gesture, an unspoken promise passed between them, a pact forged, not in flamboyant declarations, but in the sacred space of understanding and shared vulnerability. The season, with all its glittering promise and peril, waited just beyond the garden gate, but here, in this fragile pocket of night, two guarded hearts began the slow, careful art of healing and perhaps of love. The ballroom shimmered like a constellation, fragmented onto the polished floor, every chandelier crystal, a star casting fractured light over the swirling gowns and tailored coats. The murmur of genteel conversation rolled beneath the waltz of violins, punctuated by clipped laughter and the subtle clinking of glass. Eleanora moved through this familiar celestial dance with a steadiness deliberately honed by years of pain and guarded resolve. Her aunt's hawkish eyes never strayed far, but the thoughts in Eleanor's mind were elsewhere, not on the swirling silk of her skirt, but on the silent promise that had lingered just beyond the edge of the night. Yet, as they entered the room, the atmosphere shifted, a ripple of recognition, a subtle tightening in the air, as if the very walls held their breath. Whispers, barely audible to most, yet sharp and precise as the edge of a well-honed blade, threaded through the clusters of well-dressed guests. "The Duke," some murmured, "a man whose fortune is as precarious as the rumours that cling to his name." Others, with a faint, malicious gleam in their eyes, spoke of broken promises and debts that could topple even the mightiest houses of London. Eleanor heard nothing of it, or rather she chose not to. Her green eyes, bright and focused, skimmed the room with a measured calm that belied the flutter beneath her ribs. Her lips pressed together in a quiet strength, an unspoken declaration to herself and to the world that the past would not dictate her present. Those whispers, that judgment that threatened to pull Dunstan's name through the mud, she refused to acknowledge. They were but shadows cast by jealous hearts, tendrils of smoke dissipating before warmth and light. Yet Dunstan felt it all, felt the subtle shifts, the coarse edges lined with scandal, aimed at her and at him. He caught the sharp glances that flickered too late into masked smiles, heard the faint snide comments masked as innocent observations. Lord Dunstan's finances are in questionable condition, or so the papers say. Does one truly think a woman of Lady Eleanor's standing, widowed, but wary should, entangle herself with such a man? If match it can be called, between two broken pieces. His jaw clenched imperceptibly, the flicker of fire in his grey eyes barely contained behind their usual steely facade. But more than anger or frustration blossomed in Dunstan's chest. It was admiration, deep and tethered to no idle sensation. For she held herself with a dignity that scandal could not waver, eyes clear and proud, even as the whispers swirled around like a threatening storm. She bore society's contempt with a restrained grace that stirred something protective in him, a fierce yearning to shield the fragile flame she guarded so well. He watched her, unnoticed, as she met a pair of particularly pointed stares, deliberate, almost cruel, in perfect composure, her smile a quiet rebellion against the venom. Every step she took, measured and unshakable, spoke volumes. Dunstan thought, this is no timid widow, cloaked in sorrow. This is a woman forged in fire, delicate as glass, but as resolute as the stones of Highclere itself. Eleanor felt the heat of the jabs. Words, after all, were weapons, and in the delicate battlefield of the season, silence could cut just as deeply. She had no desire to play their game, no thirst for public vindication or any demonstration. She would not rise to bait or chatter with those eager to see ruin. Instead, her restraint became her armour, an unyielding shield that only drew more respect from Dunstan, who remained close but respectful, allowing her to navigate the treacheries of the social whirl. He reached her side at last, lowering his voice so only she could hear, a subtle, steady anchor amid the currents of society's gossip. "You carry yourself like a queen among jesters, Lady Eleanor," he murmured with a faint smirk, his tone half teasing, half admiring, a playful spark igniting briefly before her lips curved into a soft smile. "Effortless is merely another name for practice, Duke. Practice in ignoring the noise and focusing on what truly matters." And what truly mattered, though neither dared say it aloud, was the fragile thread weaving them together beneath the harsh glare of the season. The evening waned, and as the final notes of the orchestra drifted into the night, Eleanora withdrew to the quiet retreat of her estate's private study, where shadows danced softly against the panelled walls. There, beneath the glow of a flickering candle and the weight of solitude, she opened a letter she had received that very afternoon, its handwriting dreadfully familiar. The envelope was sealed with the insignia of a solicitor, an unwelcome visitor in any circumstance, but now especially so. Her hands trembled just slightly as she unfolded the parchment, the delicate script revealing a truth she had hoped was mere rumour. Her late husband's debts, large and tangled like a web she had been blind to, were real. More than real, they were immediate, pressing, and irrevocable. A cold knot settled in her stomach as she read of the impending auction, her estate, the land her family had cherished for generations, set to be sold to satisfy creditors' claims. The mounting papers of the account details bore down on her like a physical weight, threatening to extinguish the fragile hope she had nurtured for a future of independence and renewal. Her breath caught, heart pounding unevenly. If this news reached the halls of Almacks, if the whispers grew to roars of scandal, the delicate progress she and Dunstan had made could unravel like a poorly sewn seam. She felt the walls close in, the glittering illusions of the season reduced to harsh, unyielding reality. Hours later, the delicate rustle of a visitor's approach pulled her from her spiralling thoughts. Dunstan entered the room, his presence a silent reassurance. His eyes, always so noticeably guarded, softened as he saw the letter clenched in her hand, the lines of tension framing her delicate features. "Eleanora," he said quietly, voice low with concern, "you should not carry such weight alone." She hesitated, pride and fear battling within her. Revealing this secret meant vulnerability. Yet Dunstan's gaze was steady and offering sanctuary, not judgment. He took the letter gently from her trembling fingers and read the painstaking details. When he looked up, the usual fire in his eyes was tempered with resolve. "These debts, they do not define you, nor shall they define the future you deserve." Eleanora shook her head, bitterness threading her words. "It is my husband's failure, not mine, and yet I bear the ruin. The estate, it must not fall to auction. I cannot lose the last vestige of what was once our refuge, however tarnished." Dunstan stepped closer, lowering his voice further as he offered, "There are ways, discreet ways to avert such calamity. I have resources more than stories claim, and an interest far beyond mere acquaintance in seeing you safe." Her heart stuttered at the thought of accepting aid from him. The pride that had once built walls now trembled on the brink of crumbling. Yet beneath that pride stirred gratitude, mingled with an aching relief she did not dare voice. "Why?" she whispered. "Why? Would you?" "Because if anyone understands ruin," he interrupted gently, "it is a man seeking redemption from the ruins he himself has helped create. I do not offer charity, Lady Eleanora, only partnership quiet, without society's prying eyes." His words settled over her like a warm cloak on a winter's night. The challenge to his own pride was evident in the small, almost imperceptible hardening of his expression. He would protect her, not with grand declarations or public defences, but with quiet, unyielding loyalty. In that moment, the fragile promise from the garden whispered again between them. This was no longer about whispered glances or tentative steps. It was about facing the storm together, unmasked and unafraid. Eleanora took a breath, beginning to relinquish a fraction of the fear that threatened to overwhelm her. Then, "We must be cautious. The eyes of London are sharper than any blade, and their tongues more venomous." Dunstan smiled, a rare softness touching those brooding features. "We will move like shadows in the night." Silent, but relentless, the candle flickered, casting their intertwined shadows against the wall, 2 figures bound by secrets, scars, and an emerging trust that neither had dared hope for before this season of whispered scandal. Where once there had been only guarded distance, now there was purpose, shared and unspoken but no less powerful. Outside, the world might still spin on the axis of gossip and ruin, but within these walls, a new chapter was unfolding, one written not in the ink of pain or loss, but in the steady script of alliance and hope. And as Eleanora folded the letter with more resolve than she had felt in weeks, Dunstan's steady presence at her side was a silent vow that neither debts nor society's cruel whispers would break what, in the quiet desperation of midnight, had begun to flourish between them. The dining room was suffused with a tense, brittle quiet that felt less like peace and more like a fragile glass sculpture teetering on the edge of shattering. The flicker of candlelight danced off polished silver and crystal, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch to the very corners of Eleanora's carefully guarded composure. Her aunt sat rigid at the head of the table, her powdered curls perfectly coiffed, and her pale, steely eyes fixed on Eleanora with a cold, calculated scrutiny. The soft clinking of cutlery and the distant murmur of muted conversations beyond the thick velvet curtains were the only reprieve from the suffocating stillness. "You must understand, my dear," her aunt began, her voice smooth and clipped, as though each word were a carefully weighed coin. "The debts have mounted, and the scandal that shadows our name threatens to topple what little reputation we have left. It is no longer a matter of personal happiness or sentimental fancy. This is about preservation, about legacy." Eleanora sat quietly, her hands folded demurely in her lap, the faint scar near her temple catching the flickering light as though illuminated by some inner fire. She met her aunt's gaze with a stillness that unsettled the elder woman's brittle confidence. In the heavy air, every heartbeat echoed like a defiant drum. "Very well," her aunt continued, her lips thinning with a hard edge, "is what I advise. There are gentlemen, available, reputable, who could mitigate the ruin. It is not merely an option, but an imperative. Your position here, indeed, our survival, depends upon it." The words fell like a gauntlet at Eleanora's feet, but where others might have crumbled or pleaded, she allowed a trace of serene detachment to settle across her features. There was a stillness in her eyes, emerald and unyielding, as though announcing a quiet yet unshakable rebellion. "Of course, I understand the gravity of our situation," Eleanora said, her voice steady, her tone carefully measured. "But if the estate is to be preserved, aunt, it will be by means worthier than indifferent alliance." The ghost of a disapproving smile, or was it disdain, passing briefly like a shadow across her face. "You speak as though love or sentiment should triumph over duty. There is no room for folly in these matters." "The world is unrelenting, Eleanora. I do not deny the consequences of our decisions," Eleanora replied, "but I also do not believe that choosing convenience over conviction is truly preservation. A union built solely on necessity is brittle, already cracked before it is tested." Her aunt's hand trembled imperceptibly as she raised her glass to her lips, disguising the unrest within. "Sentimental notions have led others in our circle to ruin. You would do well to remember that." Eleanora lifted her own wine-glass slowly, the rich ruby liquid catching the candlelight like a promise of something deeper. "And yet, aunt, it is those very notions, the hope, the conviction, that lend strength to endure. I intend to choose love, not convenience. If the estate is to survive, it will do so on the foundations of what is true, not what is profitable." The words hung in the air between them. The table seemed to constrict, the elegant mahogany confining her aunt's rigid posture, in a moment of unspoken defeat. "You are a stranger to prudence, child," her aunt said, the faintest edge of warning threading through her tone. "Perhaps," Eleanora answered, a quiet fire sparking behind her deep green eyes. "And I refuse to live within bars forged by fear." Her aunt's gaze flickered, unyielding, yet now subtly thawing in the face of such unexpected resolve. The oppressive weight of generations seemed to shift just slightly, as the daughter of the house rose quietly in her own strength beneath the watchful eyes of tradition and duty. Later, when the remnants of dinner had been cleared, and only the soft whisper of curtains stirring in the night breeze lingered, Eleanora found herself once again in the company she had come to both welcome and dread, Dunstan. The Duke's silhouette was etched by the soft glow emanating from the hearth, a quiet presence that filled the room with an unspoken gravity. He spoke first, his voice low yet incisive. "Your aunt's words doubtless hang heavily on your mind." Eleanora's glance met his, emerald eyes alight with an unyielding spark. "Her counsel is as cold as the marble of the estate's pillars. Pragmatic, yes, but utterly devoid of warmth. She fears ruin, yet believes it to be quelled by strategic marriages and silent sacrifices." Dunstan's brow furrowed, that faint crease deepening between his steely grey eyes. The world knows little other than pragmatism dressed in silken etiquette, yet beneath all the gilding, it is still a pitiless place. Yet we wear our masks as though the facets of truth are to be hidden forever, Eleanora said, her voice soft but edged with the fire of defiance. But what of those who would dare to challenge it? Who refuse the cold safety of compromise in favor of something riskier? Authenticity, passion, even scandal. His gaze sharpened, and for a moment the brooding Duke, who had seated himself so firmly in society's judgment, seemed poised to disarm her with that rare and difficult vulnerability she glimpsed only when their guards fell. "Destruction with such talk," he murmured. "And yet there is a truth in those words, a truth that frightens more than it liberates." Eleanora nodded, stepping closer into the circle of warmth cast by the firelight. "It is the truth that terrifies society, the truth that refuses to be bent or broken by whispering tongues or powdered masks. I tire of the endless dance of shadows, Dunstan. I would rather face the world unmasked, even if it means courting ruin." His lips twitched into a half-smile, a shadow of wry amusement darkening those steely eyes. To speak thus to the Duke, Miss Eleanora, is both bold and reckless. Reckless because the judgments of this very society are capable of undoing you beyond mending, and bold because, she challenged softly, the first real spark of impish playfulness daring to touch her tone, "because you find it inconvenient to be undone yourself?" He regarded her steadily, the faintest flicker of a laugh playing behind that furrowed brow. "Perhaps it is precisely because I have faced ruin before and survived that I understand what you risk, and yet admire the courage with which you do so." Their conversation twisted like a delicate pas de deux, words weaving together intellect and feeling, challenge and understanding. She felt the old walls within herself lowering, brick by brick, before the irresistible force of his presence and the gravity behind his gaze. Yet beneath the deepening connection lay the unspoken barriers, walls of pride, past wounds, and the rigid strictures laid down by the very society that sought to bind them both. Eleanora's voice softened. "You do not often offer such candour, Dunstan. Why, I wonder. What draws you to risk openness in a world that prizes silence?" He considered, eyes distant yet intent. "Because, beneath the armour, I too desire something real, and because I sense in you a spirit that will not be silenced." A silence held them, a charged quiet that trembled with possibility and fear, reflecting the unsteady dance of hearts that beat beneath their composed exteriors. "Then we are alike in that," she breathed, both navigating a world that demands compromise, yet yearning for something more. He inclined his head slightly, the barest hint of a concession born of the trust unfolding between them. "Yes, but it will not be easy." "No," Eleanora agreed, "but the easier path has never been mine to follow." As the embers flickered low and the shadows lengthened, they sat together, two figures bound by circumstance, by whispered scandal, and by a fragile thread of understanding that promised a future far more complicated and far more real than either had dared to imagine at the outset of the season. In the quiet of that room, beneath the watchful eyes of a society quick to judge but slow to understand, their alliance was no longer merely survival. It had become the first tentative bloom of something fiercely, vividly alive. The morning air held a crispness that sharpened the usual buzz of anticipation swirling around the Almacks invitation tables. But it was the envelope, a cream affair, bound by a thin, pale blue ribbon, that drew Eleanora's gaze with a mixture of disbelief and cautious hope. It was delivered by the footman with a discreet bow, slipping it silently into her gloved hand before drifting away like a shadow fading into the pale dawn. Her fingers trembled almost imperceptibly as she untied the ribbon, the fine paper cool beneath her touch. It was an invitation, not merely to attend, but a summons to lead the next cotillion dance, a subtle yet unmistakable sign of her acceptance into the very fabric of society she had feared, forever barred by whispered scandals and long-held prejudices. The script was elegant, flourished with ink so dark it caught the light. Lady Eleanora was requested to take the first lead at the upcoming ball, a quiet but undeniable herald of her restored standing. Her mind spun as she read and reread the words, a tempest of emotions swirling beneath her composed exterior. Pride mingled with uncertainty. Hope fought stubbornly against the shadow of doubt she had worn so long like a cloak. Could she, would she, step into the light without faltering? It was then Dunstan entered the small drawing-room, his presence as steady and inevitable as the tides. His dark hair caught the pale sunlight filtering through the heavy drapes, his steely grey eyes holding hers with an intensity that neither hid nor demanded anything, simply observed quietly, deeply. When his glance fell upon the letter clasped between her hands, a faint, almost imperceptible tightening of his lips betrayed the guarded pride beneath his usual stoic mask. "You have been called to lead," he said without preamble, his voice low and measured but filled with a gravitas that took her breath away. Her voice, steady though her heart raced. "It seems the world is willing to forgive, or at least to forget." Dunstan's gaze softened, a flicker of vulnerability passing like a shadow across his features. "Not forget. Perhaps, instead, to recognize, if only tentatively, that you may yet shape that world on your own terms." She regarded him silently, their shared understanding, deep as the slow, steady pulse of the season's fading light. In that quiet moment, under the weight of unspoken promises and uncertainties, Eleanora felt the barest edge of courage steel her. Whatever the night might bring, she would not be the woman who once trembled before the judging eyes of Almacks. No. Tonight she would lead. Asterisks. The grand ballroom was awash in shimmering gaslight that kissed the polished floors and gilded panels with a warm glow, the heavy strains of the string quartet weaving an enchanting, lilting melody through the crisp night air. The air itself seemed charged, thick with the collective breath of a society at once watchful and enchanted. And there she was, Eleanora, a vision of restrained elegance, her gown, a delicate shade of moonlit grey that caught the light with every graceful movement. With a nervous steadiness, she stepped forward as the crowd parted, eyes both familiar and newly curious, following her with an intensity that set her nerves alight. And then Dunstan was at her side, as if summoned by the silent rhythm of her heartbeat, his tall figure a steadfast shadow in the swirl of silk and satin. They began to move, first tentative, as if testing whether the steps would remember the soft language of two bodies finding harmony. Then, with each measured turn and glide, their dance spoke volumes, more than words could. The whispered judgments that had once hovered like poisonous clouds about Eleanora's name dissolved into the ambient rustle of fine fabrics and muted gasps. Their restraint was a language all its own, a quiet symphony of unspoken affection and mutual respect. Every glance, every subtle touch of hand to hand was laden with meaning, yet cloaked in decorum. Dunstan's eyes never left hers, unwavering and stark, against the delicate softness of her gaze. In those moments, amid the swirl of dancers and the gleam of chandeliers, they were neither duke nor widow, neither prisoner nor pariah. They were simply two souls, moving in perfect, fragile accord. Voice low beneath the music's swell, "Because memory is a weight we choose how to carry," Dunstan replied, his breath a whisper against her ear, "and with you, heavy regrets lighten." A shiver passed through her, not from the chill of the evening, but from the raw tenderness nested beneath his words. For the first time in the season, she dared to believe that the fragile promise between them might yet outlast the night. Asterisked. The ball had dwindled to murmurs and slow waltzes when a tall figure approached her with the unmistakable air of expedition. Lord Harrington, wealthy, well-connected, and as conventional as morning tea, bowed with practised ease, the gentleman's smile polished to perfection. "Lady Eleanora," he began with formal grace, voice smooth and unyielding, "it would be my greatest honour if you would consider my proposal of marriage. A match advantageous to both families, an unblemished future assured." Eleanora studied him carefully, the lines of his face betraying nothing but well-rehearsed civility. A part of society eagerly expected her acceptance, not merely for the security it promised, but for the restoration of her reputation. Her aunt's eyes gleamed with subtle encouragement nearby, and the quiet buzz of observation tickled her awareness. Yet, as she met Lord Harrington's confident gaze, Eleanora felt the sharp pull of truth beneath the layers of convention. She could not give her hand to a man who could never see the soul beneath the scarred porcelain of her life, who would trade affection for assurance. "Lord Harrington," she said softly but clearly, lifting her chin with quiet resolve, "I am honoured by your offer, but I cannot accept." The words hung in the air like a delicate glass, fragile yet unyielding. A hush rippled through the room, a mixture of astonishment and silent gossip. Eleanora's aunt's smile faltered for a heartbeat, a spark of barely concealed disapproval flashing behind her composure. "My dear," her aunt murmured sharply, "you forget your place. Ace, such refusals invite speculation, scandal even." Eleanora's gaze did not waver. Instead, she turned slowly, letting the amber light catch in the depths of her deep green eyes, and sought Dunstan's across the crowded space. His look found hers, effortlessly quiet, steady, filled with a rare warmth that did not crowd but beckoned. Their mutual recognition, spellbound and wordless, was more powerful than any declaration. It was a pledge made in silence. The choice had been made. The music dimmed, the crowd thinning as the night deepened, but Dunstan lingered near where Eleanora stood, a solitary figure against the gentle hum of retreating guests. He came to her side with the deliberate calm of a man unaccustomed to rapid decision, but whose resolve had been hard-wired into his very soul. "May I?" he asked with a low bow, not to lead a dance this time, but to claim the moment entirely. Eleanora inclined her head, her smile small, delicate as the first bloom of spring against the frost. "I will stand by you," Dunstan said, his voice a quiet oath, "through every whispered judgment, every raised brow, every shadow society throws between us and the light we seek." She looked up, truly looked, into the unswerving depths of his gaze. "And I will stand with you, Dunstan, not as a shield, but as an equal. Whatever comes, we face it together." A weight lifted between them, nearly imperceptible but tangible, an invisible bond forged by shared vulnerability and fierce hope. The world beyond paled into insignificance, the fragile promise of the night settling softly between them like a thread of gold stitched into their future's uncertain fabric. They were not yet triumphant, not yet free from the chains of expectation or the sting of unforgiving tongues, but they were no longer alone. Together, in the quiet murmur of retreating voices and the residual warmth of candlelight, Eleanora and Dunstan took the first true steps toward a horizon that neither had dared to dream. And in that subtle, profound beginning was the bloom of a love neither the scandal nor the season nor the world could deny.